Pixel. I'd like to welcome you to Wet Pixel Live. I'd also like to introduce you to our resident expert, Alex Mustard. Hi, Alex.
Hey, Adam. Nice to be here again.
Yeah. It's always good to see you. Today we're going to discuss a topic that's been featured on the forums a lot, and that's to do with the release, or the relatively recent release, of Nauticam's new wide-angle conversion port 2. Many people are familiar with the WACP1, and recently they have also, relatively recently, they've just released WACP2. And Alex is actually one of the few people that's had opportunity to shoot this in the wild. Obviously, this is since most of us have been in lockdown ever since. So I guess the first point is really to try and talk about the similarities and differences to, and maybe to go through how they work a bit. So Alex, do you want to give a sort of overview of WACP1, WACP2, what they do, how they work, that kind of thing?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the question that's sort of been bouncing around in the Wet Pixel forums is, WACP1 or WACP2.
Yeah.
And although they share a lot of similarities, they go about things in a very different way. And I don't see it as quite such a simple question as that. In terms of how they work, they do take a little bit of getting your head around, because this is something new in underwater photography. We haven't really had systems like that. And this is a way of creating a wide-angle lens underwater. Instead of using a simple dome port, you're actually using an additional supplementary lens that's been designed specifically to work underwater with a specific lens behind it to create a new, more complicated lens system and give exceptional image quality when doing so.
Yeah.
And we're very fortunate that Nauticam have been investing in the engineering and the optical design to be able to produce these things. And I think they're offering them actually, and I'm not a Nauticam sort of cheerleader, but they're offering them at a really great price. I think if they were offering them with the sort of normal markup you see on underwater gear, they'd both be a lot more expensive than they are, because the amount of high quality, expensive optical glass and bespoke design in them,
it's the time,
they should
isn't
be
it?
charging a lot more money.
Yeah.
I think another important point I wanted to sort of start off with before we get into the detail too much is, although these are Nauticam products, they are external mounting lenses, and it's very easy to adapt them to any housing system. You use yours on a Seacam housing.
Yeah, I use mine with
I've got mine on a Subo housing.
I've got an adapter that Saga made me that dovetails straight into it, and it's really neat. Yeah.
And actually, the WACP1, you need an adapter to use it on a Nauticam housing.
Yeah.
Because it's designed with a smaller thread than their normal SLR thread, so housing thread. So it's very, very easy to adapt them generally. So it is something general for underwater photography. So I always get an acronym wrong in terms of defining it. I always call it a wide-angle corrector port rather than conversion port.
Yeah.
But either way, what you're doing with this lens is you're putting a lens that basically turns your normal lens on your camera into a water-corrected underwater wide-angle lens.
Yeah.
And that means you don't have any of the problems that dome ports give you in terms of corner sharpness.
Yeah.
And the upshot of that as a photographer is it means normally when you shoot with a full frame camera and a dome port, you need to keep your aperture pretty closed, otherwise your corners go all mushy in the picture when you're shooting wide angle. The advantage of these systems is they allow you to shoot at a much wider range of apertures and still have really good corner sharpness.
So just to be a little bit more technical about that, what you've got to imagine is that the image that's being presented to the sensor in the camera is now parallel to the sensor rather than curved. So we have a flat image being presented to the sensor, and that's how it manages to correct the effect of the water on the lens. And so this means basically that now your camera lens is functioning exactly as it's designed to function in air. It's having an image presented to it that's near enough parallel to itself, and that's why it's a conversion port. It's converting this curved image into a flat image.
And then the two of them are designed to work a little bit differently. The WACP1 is the smaller of the two, although it is still a big chunk of glass. And that's designed to work with a 28mm lens. You can either use it with a 28mm prime or with a 28 to something zoom.
Yeah.
And it typically works better with simpler lenses. Yeah. If you ever look at a lens diagram of sort of a complicated modern wide angle lens, the center part or the back part of that lens of a modern lens, just a land lens, is actually a relatively simple optical lens. And then in front of that, there are various correcting elements. And that's, I think, a lot of the design. That's the way I like to think about the design philosophy of the WACP1, is actually if you take a relatively simple lens and put it behind it, it's relatively easy then to put the correctors in front of it.
Yeah.
And so the WACP1 is designed to take that 28mm lens, which sees about 70 degrees, 80 degrees, and stretch it out using the optics into a 130-degree wide-angle lens. So it's a very wide lens.
Yeah.
And at the same time stretching it out, it's correcting it for underwater use.
Yeah.
Now, I think one of the really hard things to get your head around as a photographer is the lens that you're using on your camera body is a relatively cheap old lens.
Yep.
And one of the first things you learn when you get serious about photography is the better the lens you put on the camera, the better your picture quality. But dome ports are so potentially degrading to image quality that actually you end up with better image quality with a relatively simple lens, really well corrected for underwater use, than a very expensive lens with just a simple concentric dome port in front of it.
Yep.
And that's the philosophy behind it. And all the test stuff that I've done, that other people have done, clearly show that's the case for the WACP1. And I know you, Adam, you use it religiously all the time.
Here I
and
have.
You're very convinced by it.
Here I have the lens. So this is a legacy Nikon 28-70. I saw it on eBay yesterday for £100. So what, $140, something like that. And it produces, I think it outproduces, the image quality is better than I would get with a big dome, a much more expensive wide-angle lens on full frame. So the lens for $150 or whatever, $140, it's a the lens bit is the bargain.
One thing I would say about that lens, just to be aware of, is it's in Nikon speak, it's an AFD style lens.
Yeah.
That means it doesn't work with an adapter on a Z series camera.
Yeah.
It won't autofocus. It's just important to mention that, because I think particularly those full frame mirrorless cameras are going to become more and more widespread in underwater photography. And if people watch this video in the future,
yeah.
We're in summer 2020 at the moment. But if you're watching this video in a few years' time, just be aware there may not be that much compatibility with that particular lens going forward.
Yeah.
I'd like to show you sort of a sample shot with it. So this picture here, which we'll put up on screen, is a pair of oceanic white-tip sharks. I shot this in November with the WACP1 and the 28-70. And you can see, the sharks were super close, but you can see that it gives a very wide scene. This one was shot at f11, although, I could have got really nice image quality even at f8. f11 was a nice setting to be on.
Yeah.
So just because the lens can be shot more open doesn't mean you always need to.
You have both options, don't you? Yeah.
Yeah. And if I'd probably been shooting this with a dome port, I would definitely want it to be at f13, f14.
Yeah.
So I'm getting myself a few fractions of a stop, which does help with the lighting a little bit, particularly if the subject is big or far away.
Yeah.
But generally it's got really great image quality. The WACP1 does have some barrel distortion, that's fisheye distortion, but with a natural history situation like this, you don't see that at all. And it's a much milder level of distortion than a full fisheye gives you, partly because the lens is that much tighter. Yeah. And so it gives a really nice effect. I know you probably push this lens more to the extremes more of the time, Adam.
Yeah, I did a shoot for a training agency on rebreathers back at the end of last year in some very, very challenging conditions. It was very dark, it was very gloomy, and I'll pull the image. The image shows it's obviously a diver on a rebreather inside in this case, an airplane. So there's very, very little light. And I shot this with the Nikon with the 28-70 at f4.5. So it's pretty much as wide open as it can go. And to be honest, the corners are not perfect. I would say that there still is some distortion in the corners, and I think for a fine art image, it probably would be unacceptable. But the fact is that for the purpose of this image, which is a commercial image that's being used for a particular purpose, there is no other lens dome port combination that would really have allowed me to get this picture.
In those challenging situations,
in that particular environment. So this is from a commercial point of view, what the WACP allows you to do is it allows you to create images in situations where, to be honest, you simply wouldn't be able to do so otherwise. So it has a major kind of commercial function. I think that's an important element to when you're considering getting one or which version to get. That's, you need to think about that. I know.
I would say as well. Sorry, Adam. I would say as well. Anyone who needs convincing about this is, have a look at Adam's shot, and next time you're on a dive with, say, a 16-35 behind a dome port,
Yeah.
put it at f4.5 and take some pictures, and you'll quite quickly see what these lenses can give you.
Yeah.
I think the other thing I really like about the WACP-1 is using it with that 2870. You've got this phenomenal zoom range.
Yep.
It's the biggest zoom range that I've ever had the capability of underwater, and that it's a fantastic lens to use when you're maybe doing sort of big animal chasing. You don't know how close they're going to come, or you're diving a site for the first time. You don't really have an idea what you might see.
Yeah.
It gives you a tremendous flexibility to be able to deal with a really wide range of subjects.
Yeah.
And I really like that aspect of it, particularly in destinations like Galapagos, Maldives, when there's lots of action, but you're never quite sure what the viz is going to be like, how close things are going to come.
Yeah.
And in those destinations, I absolutely love the lens.
Yeah.
And any big animal trip as well, I use it a huge amount. I used it loads in Cuba this year. Have been diving this year, I have to remember. But I don't take it on every trip. When I went to the Cayman Islands in January this year, I didn't take it at all.
Yeah.
Because there it's not really a big animal destination. It's more fisheye scenery. And that trip, of course, gave me the chance to shoot with the WACP-2.
Yep.
And you were supposed to be using it right now, weren't you, Andy?
Yeah. So our cave photography workshop in Mexico, and we were going to use WACP-2 there. I think would be a really interesting place to use it. Again, low light, so challenging conditions. And for me, I like the caves that don't have many. They do have curves, but again, the reduction in the barrel distortion, the reduction in fisheye distortion would be really interesting. Sadly, it wasn't to be, but hopefully we'll be able. Hopefully, we'll be able to do it soon.
I think particularly for the speleoforms, it would be amazing, where you've got really, lots of stalactites and stalagmites and columns and things. The fisheye in that environment is how everyone shoots it, because it's always a challenging environment for light, and people have to open the apertures up.
Yep.
And the majority of cave pictures you see have bendy stalactites and blurry corners.
Yep.
And I think that lens could be amazing in that environment. I would be very excited to try that lens in cenotes, because you're always fighting a lack of light in that environment.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to sort of trying it for me. I had the chance to try it in Cayman this year, and I think there's a few things to understand about it. First of all, this is a great big beast, and size does matter in terms of these type of optical correctors, and Nauticam have known that from the start. The WACP-1, the first one, came about basically. I was very keen to try to use the optics of a WWL1, Nauticam's first water contact wide-angle lens, on my full-frame camera. And the problem was it just wasn't quite enough to make a difference on the full-frame camera. And so the first prototype we made, which was called the wide-angle wet lens, it never went into production, but I shot it on a few trips. And I actually don't tell Nauticam, but it's still in my cupboard back there. But, at some point, they're going to demand it back.
They are now.
But, I have to say, I still use it because it's smaller than a WACP-1. It's kind of the WACP half, zero. And anyway, but it was smaller. And when we first tested it, I did a test, and I wrote about it on WetPixel, actually, the test. Because Nauticam were happy for me to sort of talk about it.
Yeah.
And actually quite a lot of the pictures that were used to promote the WACP-1 were taken with that test lens. And it gave a good, clear advantage over a dome port.
Yeah.
But I didn't feel, and Nauticam didn't feel, that it was enough of an advantage to persuade people that it was worth spending this money on expensive optics and a cheap lens to outperform their expensive lens and dome port combination. And we felt that it just had to be more of an obvious advantage. Yeah. So Nauticam increased the size of the WACP, and it became the WACP-1.
Yeah.
And that then, I'd say the test one, the wide-angle wet lens, gave about a one-stop advantage in terms of corner sharpness and settings over a well-set-up dome port. The WACP-1 gives probably a two-stop, and the WACP-2, which is that much bigger again, probably gives a 3-stop at least advantage over a standard dome port in terms of being able to open the aperture up 3 stops and still get a usable corner sharpness.
Yeah.
But the downside to doing that is you just need to make it bigger.
Yeah.
And so the WACP2 is a big old beast. It's very heavy out of the water. It's a big chunk of glass, and therefore it's an expensive chunk of glass. You know, you're paying for more glass than is in a huge telephoto lens. So obviously it's very expensive, and that optical glass comes from big optical glass factories, and actually they struggle to make it that big. And I know some of the early supply problems with the WACP1 was that Nauticam just weren't able to get the glass from the factories because no one had ever ordered so much big glass. You know, Nikon and Canon, they don't need pieces bigger than this, and Nauticam needed even bigger pieces than that. So the WACP2 is bigger, but it works in a slightly different way to the WACP1. First of all, it doesn't try to stretch the lens very much, so you can use a wider lens behind it. On a full frame SLR, you would use, say, a 1635.
Right.
But particularly on the mirrorless cameras, on the Nikon, you use the 14 to 30, and on the Canon, I think you use a 15 to 30.
Yeah.
And those lenses are actually slightly wider. So on a 1635, it gives you 130 degrees.
It's the same as WACP1.
This WACP2.
Yeah, but it's the same as you get with a 2070.
And then on the Z series Nikons, which is what I've shot it on, with the 14 to 30, you get 140 degrees.
Wow.
And that is a wide old beast of a view.
Yeah.
The other big difference compared to the WACP1 is that the WACP1 does have a noticeable barrel fisheye distortion.
Yeah.
The WACP2 still has a small amount of that distortion, but overall it has a much more rectilinear, ultra wide angle lens look, where lines stay straighter. It has that sort of pinched into the corners look that a lot of people really like in their pictures. It certainly looks more normal to a land photographer, someone from land.
And it would be great for cenotists, going back to that. It would, straighten up those speleothems.
Meaning your stalactites would stay straight.
Yeah.
It's also that look is very valuable for videographers who have to pan the lens. Because if you pan a fisheye lens, you see the fisheye distortion as the subjects move across. Yeah. So I think for cinematographers, the WACP2 is definitely the way to go. And that rectilinear look is also very complementary of people. Yep. If you photograph a person with a fisheye lens, they become, bulbous and squashed into the middle. A rectilinear lens stretches them out. So if you imagine a human body is going to look more elegant, more pleasing with a rectilinear wide-angle lens.
So again, you obviously in situations like swimming pool shoots, that kind of thing, where you're dealing with models possibly, and obviously you haven't got the issues of size, bulk, weight because you're in a swimming pool or a relatively accessible environment. Obviously, WACP2 would obviously be a good choice for that, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I would say, I wasn't really trying to review them in this. And also because I've had a hand in some of the developments. I wasn't involved really at all in the WACP2, I have to say, other than doing a sort of final test of it just before release. But I would say that the WACP2 is the most impressive underwater optic I've ever tried.
Wow.
I'll show you this picture here. It's just a reef scene I shot in the Cayman Islands. And this was just a test shot to try shooting the lens really wide. And this one was shot at f5.6, which is a ridiculously wide angle to use. And this is with a 140 degree view. And the wider you try and view, the more difficult it is to keep the corners sharp. If you zoom in a little bit, it's easier, you don't see those corners. And so with this incredibly wide view, even shot at f5.6, this is a totally, to me, acceptable image quality, corner sharpness. And wide angle reef scenes are the most unforgiving of corner sharpness. If you shoot a diver in the blue or a shark in the blue, like our previous shots, the corners only have blue water in, and then it's very forgiving. This shot here has got detail into the corners, yet for me is completely usable at f5.6. Now, diving in the Cayman Islands, I didn't need to shoot at f5.6. I was just doing this as a test shot, but I think it shows very clearly what it can do. And a lot of the time shooting it, I was just still shooting it f8, f11, f13, because on a tropical dive, there was enough light, the subjects were close enough, my strobes were powerful enough to use that. So that it's really the other thing that the WACP2 can do that the WACP1 can't is it can shoot splits.
Shooting air,
The way the optics work is that you can shoot splits with it. However, personally, I think this is a big red herring, because this is not a lens I would ever want to shoot splits with. Because underwater, this great big chunk of glass, and it is a great big chunk of glass, is very nice to dive with. It's neutral, and it's really easy to maneuver around. As soon as you start lifting out the water, you realize how heavy it is. And it is one of the hardest lenses to shoot splits with, simply because you have to lift all this weight out of the water. So you could use it for shooting splits, but it also, the optics of it don't give you any advantage over a dome port for shooting splits. Because you still need to shut the aperture down to get the two halves in focus.
So a big dome and a fisheye is probably still a better way of shooting splits.
Yeah, or even a big dome and a rectilinear. There's no... so it can shoot splits, which is, I guess, good if you've got it on a shoot and you need to shoot a split. But if you're going in specifically to shoot splits, I would never choose a WACP.
And I guess, again, same thing here. If you're standing in a swimming pool or something, it would work well. But yeah, it's going to be hard.
Yeah, but you don't gain anything on the optics from using it. So it can do it, but it's not a selling point for me of it.
So the $1 million question, Alex, is you've used both. Which one would you? Which one would you choose in an ideal world?
Well, I guess my choice is a little bit already made in that I have a WACP-1. I use it a great deal. I was just, before doing this presentation, I was just reminding myself of looking for some shots from it. And actually, I think I've got more than like 360 pictures on my website with the WACP-1. And that just, to me, shows how useful that lens has been. You know, it's such a valuable lens for big animals. And it's a reasonably good size for travel. Yeah, it's a big old chunk, but it's not so big that it becomes awkward to travel with.
Yeah, you can travel with
it. So for me, and I like that slightly distorting fisheye look. It doesn't really affect, it suits the way I compose. The pictures I take with it doesn't show up. So I'm a WACP-1 man. The WACP-2 is definitely more impressive, but the challenges of traveling with it, the weight and size of it becomes quite a significant investment, both in terms of excess luggage, the difficulty of getting it to and from boats. I wouldn't want to go shore diving with it, as I'm doing most of my diving at the moment, shore diving. The last thing I want to do is carry out one of those pebble beaches out to a shore dive site. So for those reasons, I wouldn't get one. And the WACP-2 is I think about twice the price of the WACP-1 as well. But even if they were the same price, I would still go personally with the WACP-1 because it suits more my photography. But if I was a Nikon Z user and I did a lot of model swimming pool shots, or I was doing a lot of filming with a Red or something, then I'd probably be a WACP-2 guy.
Great. Thank you very much, Alex. Good advice. So I think Alex has touched on something that's very useful here. Obviously, if you can find a source of images shot with both, that's a good way of making a comparison. Alex's website is searchable by lens combinations. I think I'm right in saying that, Alex?
Yes. What I would say, though, is when you're searching, so yes, if you go on my website, amustard.com, and you look for those things, look through that. In the search box, if you type in the focal length of the lens, it will bring it up. But type it in as, so if it was for the 2870, type it in as 28.0. If you just use 28, it will pull up all the pictures taken on the 28th of the month and everything. Whereas 28.0 will only bring up the lens ones. And the same with if you want to see WACP-2 images, obviously the lens isn't stored in the EXIF, the WACP bit. So you have to search on 14.0. And that will bring up pictures with the 14 to 30.
Perfect. That's a really good.
There's only a few of that because I've only used it on one trip.
It's a good way of looking at it. I'm sure this is a subject that we'll be returning to at some point as well when we've both had opportunities to use the WACP-2 a bit more, I would imagine as well. So
I would. There's certain shots that I would love. There's certain shots like the cenotes or basking sharks, which I really love that wide rectilinear look, and the WACP-2, I'd love it for those particular shoots. But but I wouldn't love it at check-in.
Get someone else to fly it for you. Excellent. So thank you, Alex. I'll wave goodbye for now. And I'd like to thank you all for viewing this. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, which is Reef Photo in Florida. And please feel free to add comments. If you'd like us to cover any topics, add some suggestions, and please subscribe to the channel. Looking forward to seeing you for our next episode.